Hey everybody, and welcome to the Rabbit Trail Podcast. This is episode number 141.
141.
And they're still correcting each other. All right, so we're just glad you're joining with us. This is the...
OCD.
Yeah, that's right. This is the podcast where basically we chase the truth wherever it runs. And as you can tell, that's pretty random. So what we're trying to do is basically pick up conversations from the sermon that we preached here at Olive Branch Community Church and take off in the directions that it leads us. And so we're excited that you're joining with us. If you're with us for the first time, welcome. My name is Greg Harris. I'm the senior pastor at Olive Branch Community Church and likely your senior pastor. So glad that you're joining with us. But if you're new to it, I want you to just check it out. Come on, jump in and find out just like, hey, this is interesting. Join us by asking questions, all that fun stuff. But before we dive into all that, first, my fellow rabbit chasers are going to say hi and
hello.
Tell you a little bit more.
My name is Stephen Oldham. I'm the local outreach pastor here at Olive Branch. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're listening to us on some of the audio channels, either on iTunes or Spotify, give us a subscribe, give us some comments, let us know how you're doing. A lot of you do listen almost more there on the audio, so you walk with us. It must be a different experience if you see us. Somebody told me last week that they had listened to the podcast for a while, but it was all audio for them. So they knew what you looked like because you're the pastor of the church, but they had no idea who me and Brent looked like until they saw the video when we came on YouTube.
Then they went straight back to audio?
I don't know what they thought. We didn't get the answer as to what they thought our voices matched, whether the way we talk or not.
Yeah.
But
it is true. Like, you hear a voice and then you get an idea of what they look like in your head.
Totally.
And sometimes it can be like totally like,
wow. I remember way back in the day, my wife and I would listen to Michael Medved, and then we finally saw him. We're like, whoa, that doesn't look anything like his voice.
Like his voice, yeah. You don't look like your voice. Oh, okay. But if you are watching us, unfortunately, on YouTube, give us a subscribe and like and let us know. But give us some comments. We haven't had some comments. I know we had some problems getting things up to speed, but now we're up to speed on our YouTube channel, so things should be coming regularly.
Yep. And my name is Brent Branchot. I'm the Connections Pastor here at Olive Branch Church.
Hi, Brent.
Hi. And I just wanted to say that if you have any questions, life questions or theology questions, it doesn't have to be pertinent to the subject we're talking about. Just email them to rabbittrail@obcc.church, rabbittrail@obcc.church. We would love to take the time to address your questions or concerns and discuss them at length. And I just wanted to encourage you guys to do that because we haven't had a question come through email for quite a while now. So
sounds like everybody else is on vacation. And you're about to go on vacation.
I am. I won't be here next week for the podcast. So we're leaving in the morning. And we always do vacation in November because that is our anniversary.
Wait, where's your anniversary at? What number?
This anniversary next week will be 41 years. So I feel very blessed and fortunate that I have been happily married for 41 years because, statistically, only 50% of the people are happily married. And that statistic comes from a poll that I took this morning at my house. So 50% of the people in my house are happily married. And so I feel fortunate to be that way.
Did that change your perspective after?
Yeah. So, but yeah, we're going to be going on a Caribbean cruise, which will be fun. So just kind of, to prepare for the cruise, I downloaded the soundtrack to Titanic, and it's sinking right now in my playlist.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because see, you know what? These young people, they don't understand that joke necessarily because
they weren't on the Titanic.
They stream their
Titanic?
music. They don't download it anymore. You got to download your playlist and wait for it to sync up.
Okay.
Back when Brent was on the Titanic, that's how they did music.
Wait, so your download syncs up, but the Titanic sinks down.
That's right.
I'm totally confused.
I've got a sinking feeling this joke is not going anywhere.
It's sinking into your brain like that, huh?
Boom, chakalaka.
Ooh, which way though? Is it sinking up into your brain or down? Sorry. Okay, we'll stop. But so yeah, if you've noticed that Brent's on like autopilot, it's because he's got like vacationitis, senioritis, whatever you want to call it. So well, we're glad you're getting to go and not take us with you.
There you go.
We're really actually upset about that.
And
so is everyone else.
We are always
want
open
trail
for
cruise,
people to go We are going with
Rabbit
two other
Trail
couples.
Cruise, paid by Brent Branchard. Rabbit Trail
Yeah.
Cruise, paid by Brent Branchard.
Ooh.
All right. Anyway, so Stephen is going to dive into some first impressions on the dark side of the interweb.
If I do wear my Rabbit Trail T-shirt, can I write the cruise off on my taxes as a business expense?
No, but you better take some pictures because the
Yeah.
shirt's going everywhere, right?
I am bringing that shirt, so I.
Bring your shirt to odd locations throughout the world. Take a
Yeah.
picture, send it to us. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
We're gonna get one from our Christian pretty soon. I think he told me he's got some options. It's gonna be pretty sweet.
All right. So yeah, we're on the net, and today we have not any comments, so that's great. But there are some
I'm
positive
telling you,
comments.
Everybody's on vacation.
Yeah. So
No negative comments?
no negative comments. A few comments from Amen from the Cultivating Spiritual.
Dr. Amen?
No, not Amen.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Amen.
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 Amen. I met the men.
Amen.
Oh boy.
Hallelujah.
But yeah, so I want to thank you guys before we go off on the choir here for commenting on those shorts. And we're glad that you said amen. Maybe not to this, but to that. Everything's falling apart.
I'm telling you, we're talking about
Wow.
demons today, and we're just not going
All
to
the
get through this
demons are
thing.
around.
We're just going to be flinging stuff around.
Stephen is just not with it today. We even had to restart
I'm not.
the podcast.
Oh yeah,
so-
that's why.
You were like half asleep when we
I know.
restarted the podcast. Then you woke up. This thing fell down behind me. Now we're knocking microphones over. We might as well just throw that little blue die that nobody can see right in front of you and see what happens.
Be brave.
Okay.
Enjoy the journey.
So yeah, that's it. But thank you. There's no dark side today. All the dark side saved up for the topic.
Boom. Now you were talking about, and it was Tommy that was telling us last night on
Yeah.
the way home that he was listening to the podcast for a long time and was like wondering what we looked like, and we didn't really ask him that. But again,
Tommy
like,
didn't know what you looked like, and you were
that's-
talking to him.
well, yeah, he knew what we
totally
looked like last
confused.
night.
Oh.
But from the when he was listening to the podcast, he didn't know what we looked like.
That was his first intro to
But-
who we were.
But let me just ask you too. I mean, we've been doing this podcast now for almost 3 years, or going on 3 years, right? So do you ever wonder what the listeners look like?
Not if they show up to the big events with us.
go.
Then I know.
There you go.
I mean, their comments don't usually match the way they look. So
Yeah.
it's like, it's kind of, you ever notice that? Like, you get a picture of what somebody looks like from their comments, and then you meet them, and you're like, oh, you don't look anything like your comments.
Yes.
Do you want to meet some of the people that have made comments?
No.
Oh, okay. I'm just curious.
I want to meet everybody. Don't chuckle like
You're an
that.
extrovert.
I am. Come.
On
Let
his
us meet
cruise with
you.
him.
Yeah, he wants to meet you on
Yeah.
the cruise.
If you guys want to go on a cruise at some point, let us know. We'll book a olive branch cruise and just everybody go.
This is not endorsed as a promise.
Yeah.
It's for legal sake. Just making it clear. All right.
Yes.
Let's dive in. Brent, where are we going?
Okay, so again, we're in the message series Magnetic, which is basically you either are drawn to Christ or repelled by Him. And right now, the sermon message this time was fearful power, and it's from Mark 4:35, talking about Jesus in the storm. Right, that was that first one. And the disciples are worried. The storms are out of control. Jesus is sleeping, in the boat. They're fearing for their lives. And one of the things you said was Jesus calls us at dangerous times and to dangerous situations. And so when you were preaching, and I was in only first service because I was busy the other two, but I just looked up dictionary version of the word dangerous, and it said able or likely to cause harm. And I think that's kind of what we normally picture when we think of danger, is that it's going to cause, it has the potential for bodily harm or death. But the other version of that was it's likely to cause problems or have adverse consequences. And so I did kind of roll it in my head how we can also just look at uncomfortable situations as dangerous. God put me in this dangerous position because now I've got to speak the truth, and it could have adverse effects on people getting angry, people rejecting me or whatever. And so again, just this whole idea that Jesus oftentimes is going to bring us into dangerous situations and oftentimes at inappropriate times in our minds.
Yeah, I mean, originally, I think I was talking about it as like, Jesus always seems to call us at the inappropriate moment, right? It was kind of like my first attempt at it. And then just realizing that there's so much about the passage that is about danger. You know, evening is dangerous in the ancient world. The idea of going out on a boat at night, contrary to like what the kind of like the Chosen made it look like, where they're like, oh, night fishing, this is like a thing, you know, we go out with our lanterns. It's like, not likely you did a lot of night fishing, I don't think, as far as I understand. It was, you didn't necessarily like being out where you can't see, and if you fell in, nobody could see you. You know, there was a safety concern that you had, and you were likely at home sleeping. There wasn't a lot of all-night jobs unless you were doing some kind of watchman job or something like that, or you were some kind of bad person sneaking around at night. And so,
and I would say, you know, as a Jewish fisherman, you know, and I'm sure there's fish in the sea, but you know, Jewish fishermen, a lot of the unclean things are what is active at night. You know, lobster, crab, you know, shrimp. You know.
Oh, really? They're all active at night?
Oh, yeah.
No,
they kind of hide during the day, and they're out and about at night. So.
All the rest of the fish are sleeping.
Yeah.
Sleeping with the fishes.
And the sharks are out too.
So, I mean, in this idea, I kind of switched it to dangerous because it's not necessarily always dangerous to, like I said, to your body, to your person. It is also very dangerous. It can be dangerous to your finances. It can be dangerous to your relationships, dangerous to your calendar, dangerous to your aspirations for what your children are going to do in life. You know, all these kinds of things. And really, I was just trying to point out that when Jesus calls, it's the best. You shouldn't just sit around waiting for the best time. Just do it when he tells you to do it, because it is the best time. He has a reason. He knows what he's up to. He knows what he's doing, even if he leads you right into a storm. I don't know. Thoughts on that from you guys, Stephen?
Well, you're in the Mark chapter 4, verse 35 here, and then Mark chapter 5, you go into the idea. But I do think there's a concept when people have as Christians, I don't know where it develops from, that like God would never put you in a situation that appears dangerous to you. He would never do that. And this
safe.
And so there's this idea that my Christianity is supposed to be devoid of any conflict or danger. And I don't see that in Scripture at all. And usually what you have here is the exact same thing, is that he sends you to those places. Like even Jesus himself, as soon as the Spirit of God falls, and then the Father from heaven talks to him and says, "This is my son," he goes into the wilderness and automatically
without food, with wild animals.
And so it seems like you should expect to be in dangerous situations when you're called, and that's really there's not a lot of exceptions to that after a call. So I don't know where the notion get that your life's supposed to be perfect now because Jesus is involved with it, and you would never be in a situation that was dangerous to yourself. So
one of the interesting things Jordan Peterson has brought up is, and he does a lot of weird stuff with the Bible. I don't necessarily follow him.
Yeah,
one of the things
more philosophical.
One of the things I did think that was interesting about the way that he approached it was he said that, you know, person matures when they face danger with God and goes through it. That's the only way to actually mature. If you don't face fear and go through the fear, you stay a child. The route to adulthood is, and this I guess is just regular psychological knowledge. The route to maturity is by facing off with your fears and going through them. Not to be like, oh, I did it myself, but like the biblical concept is you walk with Jesus through your fears and you come to the other side. You come to a maturity.
You confront the darkness, right? Basically, is often most of your stories have that, where you're confronting the darkness.
Most psychology says that the darkness you push down and you push away turns into other problems like depression and other things like that. Like if you haven't mourned, or you haven't faced death, or you haven't faced sorrow, these kinds of things, or it can turn into anxiety, or these are the fruits of things that sometimes
of the suppression. Yeah.
And I would say too, the maturity comes through pushing through, and I think too, to some degree, your faith grows in the sense that this trust builds as you go through things with Christ. And because if you never see the power of God in your life, you will never realize how powerful God is. And so one of the things when you were talking about safety and fear is, I remember, you have always you did a sermon about that too, where you were talking about God doesn't call us to a safe life. And sometimes we, especially as Americans, can be preoccupied with safety. But I remember, like, when I was a youth leader, you were the youth pastor, and Teeny, who is one of our missionaries out in the mission field right now, at that time, it was at the height of, like, the Iraq War and all this stuff. And she then was like, I want to be a missionary. I want to go to Iraq. I want to, evangelize to the Muslims and all this stuff. And part of it, at that time, was just like, whoa, that is so dangerous. And her heart was just, how are they ever going to know about Christ unless somebody goes and tells them?
Right.
And she was like unwavering, in that, desire. And part of it was, there was a lot of fear for her in that too. And it was like, maybe pick somewhere else that's not so dangerous. And then she ended up going to Africa, Cameroon, and was a missionary there for probably a year or so,
year and a half.
And then the Boko Haram, or what, I don't know.
Boko Haram, started to actually.
They started going in and invading all these cities and grabbing the women and running them off, and
specifically Christian missionaries and Catholic missionaries.
And so, we as a church called her back, and we were working with another missionary organization, and they were calling her back home, and she was putting up a fight, and it's just, to me, it's just such bravery in the face of danger and trusting in God through the whole thing, and it was inspiring to just watch her faith, Yeah,
I mean, compared to, like, I think most people don't even understand the difference between safety and, let's be honest, comfort. Like, they go, well, it's not safe. You mean it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so I could have, at this point, when Jesus calls us out, sometimes it's just he's calling you out to do something uncomfortable. It's not even necessarily dangerous in the real sense of the terms. It's just, but uncomfortable and danger kind of come together today in a weird way.
Yeah,
because we're not comfortable in facing off against our dangers. We're very coddling. We're very careful to not let people go into hard things and face hard things and face down bullies and face down. And so when you don't do that kind of stuff, you don't.
Well, you stay a child, like you said.
You don't go through the storm. You got to go through the storm. So.
Yeah, and I mean, like, for me, we were talking about safety and comfort. I mean, like, Sunday afternoons when I go home to watch the Steeler game, I don't feel like it's God's will that I sit in a folding chair because they're not comfortable. He wants me on the couch or a lazy boy or something where I can be comfortable and safe in watching the game. But again, when I'm looking at this parable of the sea and Jesus is asleep in the boat and the disciples are panicking, and eventually Jesus wakes up and calms the storm.
Are you trying to equate Jesus on a lazy boy?
No, I'm not.
Oh, that's how close that got there. I'm like, when's the punchline dropping, Brent?
No,
I'm going to throw my heresy stick at you.
But part of it, is we are to be Christ-like. We are to be in the image of Christ.
So you should be laying down on
So when you see Jesus sleeping in the boat, and when you see him taking naps, here and there throughout the Gospels, I need some rest, I'm going to lay down and take a nap. I realized that I have probably grown more like Christ in my napping than any other area of my life. So
I'd say you're half right.
I take naps. I love naps.
You've grown.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's the in Christ part is the one I'm worried about.
I think I can attest to, like, after a long day of preaching, wanting to take a nap and taking a nap. Like, I've done that quite often. I mean, I don't think he wanted the disciples to go take a nap with him.
Yeah.
Somebody needed to sail the boat. That's one of the interesting things about the text is that that I didn't get to was that it's this weird phraseology where it says that they were in the boat, and it says, leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat. And I thought that was so weird. I'm like, took him with them? Like, it was his idea to go. And what it's implying is that, guess what? Jesus didn't know how to sail a boat. Like, put that in your thinking cap for a minute. That's like, wait, no, Jesus knows everything. No, it's literally implying he didn't know how to sail a boat.
Why do you need to know how to sail a boat when you could just walk across?
There you go. But I mean, he's allowing the people to use their gifts, their knowledge in service of him. And so he, just as he was in the boat, he's sitting there, let's go to the other side. And he didn't go like, I supernaturally call upon the rest of my omniscience in order to bring in my mind the ability to sail the boat. No, he never sailed the boats. He didn't know how. Which I just think that's interesting, that this is how human Jesus was and how much he even allowed his disciples to serve and help him. So
it's interesting.
It's just that is not allowing others to serve him, but is not a substitute for replacing him too. And so I feel like you want to serve God, and then you realize you're into trouble, but you don't want to be in the trouble without God. So you want to bring him along in whatever you're serving him in. So I think it's a nice little statement that just says, even in your job, whatever you do on your daily basis, the Lord sent you, but he also wants you to remember that he's with you. So and that to bring him with you, don't forget that he's there.
So when Christ is calling us into dangerous situations at times that we find as inconvenient, and we're struck by fear of again, whether it be physical danger or whether it be just something that could have adverse consequences in our lives. When we think about fear, how do we manage that? How do we manage our fear in order to be more obedient and confident in moving forward?
No, I mean, I'm curious to see what you have to say, Greg, but to me, there's a lot of times where people will take this passage and will say, like, you should never be afraid. And I don't think that's what the passage is saying. I think when you're in fear, what is the first go-to that you go to when you encounter your limits? It says a lot, and how you approach them and what you believe in God's capable of doing with you or to you is more important than I shouldn't even bother to be afraid because God's with me. I think it's okay to acknowledge fear. I just think to realize the authority and the power God has over those things is important. So I don't think of like being fearful of things as sin, I guess. I think of not realizing where God is in your fears, or not tackling your fears, or ignoring them can become a detriment to you. So in that sense, I do feel like you should acknowledge this is scary, dangerous as a professional fisherman, that this is a really odd storm and there's something weird going on. And I thought, Jesus, you're the one that put me in this situation, and wrestling through that and being like, he's like, well, oh, that's right. You are God. I forgot. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I forgot that I am going to get in these storms. I shouldn't be surprised, but I don't think that has to do more with like, when I'm in fear, where do I go? What do I do? And who do I seek?
Yeah. And there's that old, statement that, bravery isn't the absence of fear.
Yeah.
It's the perseverance through it. And I do feel like from that standpoint too, it's not that we shouldn't be afraid or acknowledge that we're afraid. It is not allowing our fear to cripple us to the point that we're not obedient.
Yeah.
I think the things about fear that are interesting to me is that there is this adage out there that, don't fear, have faith, right?
That's the idea that I get. Like, oh.
And they are. I think they are in some sense opposites, but not in the same way, because there is a sense that fear and faith go hand in hand. Because a long time ago, my son Nate and I were having a conversation, because he's a guy who can have fear in his life. I think everybody does, but he was kind of born with some inordinate kind of amounts of fear. And we would talk about like, hey, you know it intimately, like lean into that. Like that's something the Lord's trying to teach the world from as you struggle through this. And it was starting with this idea of fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It's the beginning of knowledge. It's like, it's not the end of knowledge. Like it's not where it stops. But when you fear the Lord, first of all, that is really where faith comes from. I think that when we don't approach God flippantly. Like I think that's what my point. I was really trying to hammer. Like God is dangerous. He's something to be afraid of. When Jesus acted in this manner and calmed the storm, his power is so incredibly great. It should just blow your mind. It should make you freaked out. You would freak out. Everyone would freak out. Somebody just went, stop. You'd be like, you just watch a magician do something that they don't understand, and they freak out. They get afraid. They get like, what the heck? Oh my gosh. It's like they're amazed. But the amazement also, then if they kept doing it and they did something that's just like scared the entire room of magicians, you'd be like, wait, what's going on here? These guys never seen anything like this before. And so I think along with the walking on the water story that in the way that Luke presents it, I believe, is that Peter looks at the waves and, he gets scared of the waves. And then Jesus says, why did you doubt? The doubt came when he thought the waves were more powerful than Jesus.
God,
And yet Jesus is standing there walking on the water. He's walking on the water. And we just misplace so easily our fear in the wrong direction. That doesn't mean the fear isn't real. It's just, are you so sure and certain that the one who is more powerful has you in it? Because he is a fearful being. As the book of Hebrews would say, right? When you fall into the hands of the living God, he is when he's against you, as we see with the demoniac, you don't want to mess with God.
Yeah.
And that's why you should be able to be comforted in your fear. I think it's okay to acknowledge your fear first. I don't think you should ignore it.
I think that would be irrational.
Yeah, I think that you just go, I'm scared, and you tell God, and then God, but then you don't get ticked at God when he tells you, I've got this. You go well, I'm scared. You can't tell me it's okay. Yes, he can, because you should be more scared of him.
Yeah.
Which I think is right here in this verse too, is when the disciples are afraid, and then Jesus stood up and said to the sea, peace, be still, and the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And then he said to them, why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? Or have you no faith? And then and they were filled with great fear and said to one another, who is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? So to me, it was like, we're scared to death of this storm and what it could do to us. Jesus stands up, calms the storm, and now they're racked with fear, oh my gosh, who is this? And he's like, what are you afraid of? Do you still have no faith?
I remember as a young guy listening to R.C. Sproul, and he was teaching on this passage, but he was talking about Freud, and Freud had an argument about the existence of God. He believed that there is no God. This is just us we have a daddy complex. We're trying to
manifest. It's a manifestation.
It's a manifestation of our Father.
It's a self-defense mechanism.
Because we want something to control the nature around us. So Freud argued, you see, we invented God because we found that the ocean was scary. So we needed a God who could control the ocean. We invented a God who could control food. So because we thought famine was scary. And so all these things that we fear, we turn into a God. And R.C. Sproul goes, but what do you do when you invent something that's more fearful than your greatest fear? Why would you invent something that is actually causing you greater fear? And in the text, he's pointing out that there is a God who is over these things, and he's scarier than the storm. That does not make any psychological sense. And because God exists. I think that I was joking around, but I thought it would be interesting if we had a horror story where the problem wasn't that these monsters keep attacking these innocent people, but that there's this innocent person walking around and he provokes the monster out of everyone, because that's what God does when he walks amongst us. He provokes the evil, we become the monsters because we want to attack. We don't like it. The monster comes out of us. We are transformed because of his power. We're so scared of it, so willing to lash out and fight against, beg him to get away, all this kind of stuff. I think it's fascinating that the demons manifest when they're near him. There's this presence that evil has to bend and show up so he can cast it out. And it was just that's a scarier story than, oh my gosh, I'm this innocent person and there's these horrible evil monsters around. Because all monster stories are stories about sin.
Usually, yeah.
And so just kind of expanded. And in this case, what we've got here is the Bible story of a true scary story, and the scariest person in the story is Jesus. That's the irony in the story, and I love it. I just absolutely love this passage. It's such a twist.
Yeah, I mean, he is the final judge, and so we should fear that as well. But he has control and authority over all things. And now, again, when we're watching The Chosen, when we're watching, stories about Christ, right, there's very little fear in that, but we're watching stuff like, horror movies of demons and whatnot, and that strikes great fear, which even to me, when I was growing up, I didn't have a problem. I enjoyed watching horror movies. I don't anymore at all, but I used to like them when I was growing up. But when I watched a horror movie that was based on the demonic, there was always this extra layer of creepy dread that it was just, I was so uncomfortable in that, you know. And if it just dealt with, you know, people killing people or whatever, you know, guys with a mask coming out of the lake, you know, to me that wasn't that scary. But when it dealt with the demonic, it was scary, you know. And it would make me lay awake at night going, ugh, that's creepy.
Yeah, you know, I've always told that story about when my kids came to me really young and they were so scared because they're just crying. They're like, there's a ghost in my room. And I'm like, oh, kiddos, it's okay. There are no ghosts. It's all right. And they're like, oh, okay. I said, but there are demons. And they come out during the day. Too.
It's not just night.
Just kidding.
Yeah. So, which reminds me of a joke. Where was that? I know, but the kid runs into the mom's room, you know, at night, and she's like, "Mom, you know, there's a monster, you know, in my room. Can I come sleep with you?" And she goes, "No. Why would I want to die too?" But anyway, going into chapter 5, when it's talking about the you know, Jesus coming up to the demoniac that is filled with legion, which is like many
6,000
demons,
like
6,000 demons or unclean spirits. So number one, before I get into the question, you had touched on this earlier, but what is the difference between a demon and an unclean spirit, or are they the same thing?
Well, before we get into that, I did want to make one more comment about the storm.
No, we passed that.
Yeah, I know. It's just the idea of it being an interesting parallel for these fishermen, because what the writer is doing here is he's setting up a scene here before he goes into the demonic. So for a young fisherman out on the sea, this as a Jewish young boy, you would have been really familiar with the story of Jonah. And in the story of Jonah, the sea represents this almost like a demonic realm where there's this beast creature foaming around the Leviathan, causing this storm to occur. So there's a lot of demonic activity even in this storm. And in that storm, the guys on the boat were afraid, but Jonah was the one sleeping. And so they wake him up, and he's sleeping on a cushion. So automatically this story is kind of invoking the spiritual aspects of that story. And some of the clues that you get here in the text is the use of the word great. For some reason, the writer of Jonah constantly likes to use this word great. And so it's here in the text like 3 times. It's the great windstorm, the great calm, the great fear. So it's bringing back all this talk about what's great, and then who's really ultimately the one who's in control of all things. And so Jonah falls into this place, almost dies, and rises 3 days. So Jesus is using this illustration to show I'm the one that's greater than Jonah, just through the way he's taking care of the storm. So in that storm, it's a demonic storm. It's a creature.
I'm not going to throw myself into the ocean to get it to stop.
Yeah, and so they were trying to pray to all their gods in Jonah, and they were like, we're praying to all the gods, and none of them work. So they wake up Jonah, and he says, oh yeah, I serve this god. And so they pray to that god, and the storm stops. And they're freaked out. And
after they throw him into
the ocean, right? And so they go all the way back to Jerusalem and start worshiping that God Yahweh, because it's by Yahweh that they were saved on the ocean. And so you have that being, so when they say, who is this that even the winds and the waves obey him, he's acting like Yahweh did in the Jonah story. And that has a very spiritual connotation, because Jonah goes all the way into hell and comes back out.
And this is why the early church fathers had no problem identifying Jesus as God and the Trinity. Like it was writ all over the place. Just Jesus is the storm god. He is the one who stops it. Like we forget that they were covered. These church fathers are walking around in a world covered with gods. There was a storm god here, and there was a water god there, and there was this god there, and that god there, and they're like, well, Jesus does everything the gods does because he's Yahweh. He's not just a guy on earth representing God. No, he was God himself. And this is why it was so clear cut to the disciples even, that they would write the way that they did.
So before we get into the Death Star, there's already kind of death coming on the scene here in the story. It's like we just crossed this huge plain of water that's a demonic symbol of like the underworld.
And they looked over to the other side and they said, that's not a moon. It's a space station.
Well, that's where they're headed, right? They're headed. You think it's where are we going? Oh, we're going to the Gentile side. It's complete dark side. We're leaving the where the Holy of Holies is, where they thought of it being where the presence was, where they at least hoped it would return. And now they're going into the enemy territory after crossing the demonic sea. And so for them, this must be very exhausting, physically working on a boat, having seen all these supernatural things. And then we get on the shore, and then the demons come out.
And it's almost as if it calms and they crunch right up onto the shore.
Yeah.
And then they get this thing called an unclean spirit. Now, what's interesting about the term unclean spirit, because earlier they're using the term demons, right? He casts out demons. I don't know when the last time he
in
used
Mark 1, I think.
unclean spirit.
Not unclean spirit.
So you want to look that up for me?
Yeah.
I'm looking at it right here. And so what's interesting about the concept is that it's early in Mark 1. So, and then Mark 3 they were claiming he had an unclean spirit. So demons and unclean spirits are the same thing. But the reason they call it an unclean spirit is, think about Old Testament, go back there and you start talking about things that are unclean. When they made you unclean, you were not allowed in the presence of the temple. You were cast away. When you were ultimately unclean, you were cast away from the society, like someone who has leprosy. You are perpetually unclean, not just unclean for a little while and wash up. Now, but anytime you were unclean, you were kept away. So if you were unclean because of some circumstance with, say, a period, or because you had a night problem or something, as a guy, and next thing you know, you're unclean. And so, but you're only unclean till you wash. But unclean means, hey, you don't really want to go roam around outside. So women, when they were unclean, hey, guess what? They got to sit down, relax for a week. And their husband, their kids did all the work in the house because they couldn't touch everything. And so, this is a really actually kind of a benefit to women in their time period. And it's actually how it's been understood. So here's a demon, though. A demon is unclean because they cannot enter into the presence of God. They can't go into the temple territory. He never casts out a demon anywhere in the temple. You don't see him ever do that. They're in Jerusalem. They're in the area. I don't even know if they're in Jerusalem necessarily, any of the places. But
they are. One spirit shows up with Jesus, and he says Jesus from Nazareth, because he's in his territory.
And that's the oddest thing, is that the way that is the infusion of Satan into Judas, who manages his way in, but into not the temple, but into the area. And so there's this sense, though, that they're unclean in the sense they're not allowed in the presence of God. They can't worship God. They're opposite of a Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is God, and so this is the opposite. They're the unclean versus the holy.
There's no way that a Christian could be, or a believer could be possessed, right?
That was a totally different question, but yeah. Yeah, there is we've talked about this a couple times in the past. So these unclean spirits, there's a couple origins as to where they come from. But the idea for them is they're disembodied. And so not only that, they seek to be put into a body oftentimes. And so when you have that idea is that we think of it as a container that you fill with a spirit or something like that. That idea isn't how the Bible looks at it. In many of the Jewish context, any foothold you give an influence to has sway over you, and the degree in which the demonic side has sway over you is the degree of control that you're experiencing. So they would say demonized. You've been demonized. It's not like you're filled, but that's why the Bible says don't keep sinning, because you give the devil a foothold. So now he has a control over a portion of what you do. In that sense, that would be a demonized situation. Now, it's not like what you see, like a completely demonized person who has they've lost a lot of their own autonomy after surrendering over a period of time. But that's why it says it starts with a sin, and then you willfully allow this thing to control you. And then after a while, it's very hard to get rid of it without somebody stepping in, without you reaching out to God. So that's kind of what you have here. But we have this idea that I think comes more from movies and things, and more from a Greek culture, is that you're like this container container, and now the container jumps into you, and it jumps into this person, and
your eyes roll back to your head and turn white.
When the demons are influence, if you think of it as influencing and allowing you to be a part of your thoughts, your worldview, allow you to dictate some of your actions, in that sense, that doesn't come from God. It comes from some other source, and so you're leaving yourself open to those things. And when you willfully ask for it, you're going to lose control for quite a period of time. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Greg.
Yeah, I disagree just a little bit, because in the book of John, it clearly says in 13:27 that after he'd taken the morsel, Satan entered into him, meaning Judas Iscariot. There is a sense that the demonic can enter in, but the entering in is after a long process. Christians cannot be possessed in the sense that we would consider it like, hey, you've got the demon controls you, and that's because the Spirit of God dwells in you. However, the word possessed, like you said, is correct. They don't have that word in the Bible. They have the word demonized is the actual better translation of the term, which is influence. In that case, obviously, demons influence Christians. We can be demonized by giving over to lies. If you believe unchristian things, you're believing either fleshly lies or demonic lies. And I always love to say, hey, you want to know if it's a demonic idea? It leads to the death of someone. Like right now, abortion is a demonic concept. It leads to the death of a child. We're the only creature that purposely enters its womb to kill what's inside of it. Like that's it, and so that's a demonic idea. It's a demonic idea to euthanize your elderly. Like we're just, they're worthless and we don't care about them anymore. Just kill them. We can call it what we want.
Too inconvenient.
Yeah, you're just inconvenient. Well, just they want to die anyway. Just kill them. Like your pain isn't actually something. So we're so sure pain is evil instead of something that can actually be purifying, transformative, as the ancients did, who are far more connected to pain than we are. And so I think of the transgender thing. It leads to so much suffering, so much pain. It often leads to suicide. That's a demonic idea. You've got the idea of so many of these concepts that lead to death, that lead to destruction. The concept of, I look around at free sex. How many people have just been destroyed by this concept? Their lives have been mangled and messed up. Pornography has destroyed and killed relationships and led people into dark areas. Something dies in a demonic concept. God's truths, things start to live. The only thing that dies in God's truth is me to my old self, me to myself for the betterment
Your
of you.
allegiance to sin.
Right. And so that's one way Christians are demonized, is they get overwhelmed by fake, false truths because they're not learning the scriptures, they're not learning the mind of Christ. Once you've been captured by a deception, once you've been captured by a lie, then it's easy to suggest action because their goal is to make you sin. Their goal is to keep you apart from God. They want you bound up in shame, bound up in anger and guilt. And so they'll tell you, this is awesome. You do it. And then they go, how dare you do that? God, do you see what they did? God, they're done. They're just all over you. They're your best friend, and then they're your worst enemy right at the same time. It's this torment that throws you back and forth. They don't need to make like lights go off and roll their eyes. That's scary, but it's easy to scare people. It's difficult to really influence them to evil.
Mm-hmm. I think because of movies, we tend to have like the demon possessed is like total occupation, which is fine as a thought, but to me, you don't want to. Any lie that you believe has spiritual connotations that are just as demonic as something that you watch with a monster figure in it or whatever. In that sense, because I don't think we put enough emphasis on allowing an evil thought to dictate the course of our life, how destructive and demonic that actually is. There's not really a separation. We would say, well, that's a psychological condition. I would say, well, there's a lot more willfulness in your ability to control certain things, but you're going to lose that control after you believe that lie, and it is going to dictate the course of your action and bring death to you. So this is what sin does in general, and somehow we've equated it to, well, that's just my sin. Well, what you're doing is you're mimicking the pattern of those in rebellion rebellion against God. And even if you have some loyalties to God, you're kind of mixing those two things, and it's going to cause chaos in your life. It's going to bring destruction.
For those people out there who are like, you guys actually believe in demons? Like, really? What is up with this? Speaking of a psychologist, years ago I did a series on demons, and I had read an entire book, and I'm trying to remember his name. He ended up becoming a Christian, and wrote kind of an early psychology book on like the road. It's called The Road Less Traveled or something like that. And his whole thing was he did not believe in the demonic. And then one day they called him and they were like, "Hey, we have
a case.
We have a case," and it was this old Catholic priest who needed just a psychologist to come in, evaluate the person so that he could continue to move forward. Because they'll analyze you psychologically first to make sure that that's not a case. Mm-hmm. And then as when he did that, it didn't go away, and suddenly his name is Scott M. Peck, and it's like the book is called "Glimpses of the Devil: A Psychiatrist's Personal Accounts of Possession, Exorcism, and so on." And he shares the stories, and they are legitimately like freaky in the way that they were able to trick people until he really dug in, and suddenly he's like, "Oh my gosh, this isn't what I think it is," and it manifested with the help of
you're looking for some kind of psychological abnormality when you find out none of that is present, and then you find out that most of this is different. It's very different in the way it carries itself out in some patterns. But I would say what's really weird is drug addiction in some senses is very similar to some of the things I've seen that our people seem to be demon possessed. At first, it gives them a certain amount of power and control or influence. People are feeling disvalued. They feel they're not powerful. It gives them that sense of control and then takes it away. Right. And so the modeled pattern, even if it manifests different, the outcome is still death, right? So I often think there are psychological things, and how you deal with spiritual things, even the demonic, is with truth. And somehow we diminish truth as it's not magic words. I have to say some kind of magic words. It's really, what do you believe? Do you believe, if someone's even possessed, the response is, do you believe that Jesus could save you? And if they're like, yeah, then okay, the truth will set you free. If you're like, no, I like the demon, not much you can do to remove that situation for a permanent period of time.
And I find it, well, go ahead.
No, I think, one of the things you said is something that I've talked about before is I do believe that, the Bible's clear. Sin is pleasurable for a season.
Yeah.
And I think that pleasurable for a season part is whatever you are involving yourself in sin-wise, you are receiving something of benefit from it, whether it be pornography and, pleasure, and then, whether it be drugs and an experience and part of that whole, party and social, we're doing this together and partying together and, and having fun and jubilee. But as you engage in that, the thing that sin promised you is the thing that it steals from you. Yeah. And you feel like you're in control. And I think a lot of times, whatever kind of addiction you are into, you feel like, okay, maybe I got some breathing room from this, and if I engage again, I can control it this time. Right. And you have this false sense of you're in control when you are not, and it will control you, and you will hate everything about
that's making you do,
that it's making you become, that is stripping from your life, but you cannot say no to it. And and so I do like that idea that sin promises you and then it steals from you exactly what it promised.
And that's the thing, right? So stop and remember, like the ancients, what they were dealing with, like the gods are real, folks. I think that we have to make this clear. We as Christians, we believe there is one true and living God. There is Yahweh who's above all. He's the creator God, and he made all these other beings, some of them who are archangel-like, whatever an archangel is in the sense of what their job description. There are spiritual beings that are powerful and capable of doing great harm to us. And these very powerful beings, like a Satan character, they manifested themselves as the gods. The gods are real in the sense that, now stop and think about it, because we go like, but okay, drugs. there's a witch god named Hecate who is over the stuff of witchcraft, and we call it pharmacesia. We literally have a term for it. That was use of drugs for what? Divination, for fortune telling, for power, enlightenment. All of these drug uses were potion making, were for the attempt to gain power. Guess what? Over the demonic. They called them daemons. They knew they existed, and they would do all kinds of magic rites and incantations to make these demons act on their behalf. I mean, it's not new. None of it's new. It's all the same stinking stuff. And they just named them. They were gods who were literally acting in these manners, promising them literally these things. And they were sacrificing to them to gain these powers, to gain these things. And it was a very different world than we live in today. And they still play the game. They just don't use the names.
Yeah.
And so, they act, all these things, you're right. They act like alcohol acts in a way and then steals from you. It does these things. And I think when you're looking at addiction, you are technically looking at some kind of demonic bondage, an oppression of some sort. And it takes the work of Jesus through sanctification to break the chains, and that you have to literally say no to it. That's why would 1 John end with the idea? His last line in the book of 1 John is, brothers, flee idolatry. Why would he tell the church to flee idolatry? Except that there are Christians who still get caught into idols.
I mean, we all do. I mean, think about the thing you serve above God. That's your idol. And it can be what you're doing when you're worshiping some kind of idea, something will infill that idea that's going to start dictating to you what you want to live like. There's a slight deviation for some people who've been in Christianity because they put a lot of the emphasis on the control over the demon. And I would say the emphasis needs to be on that person's willingness to surrender. So we're talking about this text, and what the text is very much saying is everyone is surrendering to the will of God. Mm-hmm. And so this idea that I can cast this demon away because God gave me power is not the right approach. The right approach is you have believed a lie, and God is the truth. You need to unwrap that lie and denounce it. Sometimes for people that immediately means that situation, but others it's therapy. It's walking through those lies.
It's surrendering to the truth and living it out, and even when it hurts.
Patterning the will of God through the scriptures. It's a longer process, but I wouldn't say it's less spiritual or more spiritual. So some people, because I come from that Pentecostal background, and I got into psychology for reasons like this, because people couldn't discern between something that's more psychological and less demonic, and everything was just demonic. And I was like, whoa, no. In one sense, it is all, if it's a lie, it's of the devil. The question is, how do you resolve it? But it's always the same. It's always with the truth of God. And it's always a surrender in some way, either long-term or short-term by the mercy of God, that he wants you to walk through this darkness to clean this up. And for some of us, that does mean working on our thoughts. The battle is always in this wrestling of not in flesh and blood, but in these ideas, these beliefs, these powers that are not of God that you have to denounce and get rid of. And there's ways to do that. Therapy is a way to do that. The reading your Bible, being in fellowship is a way to do that. Being under somebody's authority that says, look, I have the ability, I can't control myself. I need to have people help me with that. And then ultimately, the only way you get rid of all the vices in life is to surrender your will to the one who's in control of the universe. And I think that's what the text is saying. Like,
isn't that the first step in every recovery model in the world?
I'm powerless.
You have to surrender. Henry Cloud was being interviewed on a podcast currently by Carey Nieuwhof. I just finished listening to it. He's out with a new book, but he was like, look, that's the baseline of all transformation.
Recovery group, yeah.
All transformation begins with surrender. Unless you start with surrender, you're not gonna overcome. He was talking primarily about depression because he'd gone through such bad depression. He's like, but it happens with surrender.
I'm not God.
You can't.
I'm not God. I can't control this.
But it's not passive surrender either, because he's like, you surrender, but you have responsibility. It's very fascinating. But I do think that in this passage, when we're talking about the demonic and we're talking about these things, look, I think demons can mess with you. I think that they can try to scare you. I can remember a story. I remember this, and I think he was trying to freak me and my friends out at some level. We were being stupid. I think I've told the story. We were my freshman year. We got to my friend's house for his birthday, and we all go upstairs because one of the people brought a Ouija board. Ooh, like they bring it out, and literally they're like, I'm sitting on the bed. I'm going to touch the thing. And I'm sitting next to this lamp, and it's a halogen lamp, and so they're moving around, and they open the window, and suddenly this Bob, I still remember his name, Bob. I'm like, that's really easy to use. That's like, but they're like, Bob, if you're here, give us a sign. Like literally use that old statement, and suddenly that halogen lamp just goes, boop, turns off. It just shut off, and I'm right next to it, so I didn't touch it. Nothing happened, and it just shut off. You never saw a room of freshmen and sophomores empty faster than we're just like, screaming and running down the stairs. It was just because, they'll mess with you because
if you're calling on them directly too.
They want to try to make you think they're powerful.
Yeah.
And they want to scare you. Look, this man was possessed by 6,000, maybe 2,000. We know at least 2,000 demons because of the pigs. Mm. So, and
a legion could also just be like a large number.
Yeah, it's above 2,000 of some kind.
It's a specific number in military combat situations, but it became, I guess, kind of used as a phrase. It's like, oh, you have an army of people with you today, and there might be seven.
I'm not sure. That probably is post-Roman time. We're in the Roman time period, so. Yeah. But it definitely is this idea of like a huge number of, and obviously 2,000 pigs. So you get this idea of like this guy has called upon demonic power a lot. It's like. And how many times did he have it cast out? And Jesus is referring like, he goes and he finds 7 of his brothers and comes back and it's even worse than
it was before, yeah.
Like how many times did that happen? That they cast out a whole bunch of them, they all came back with more. Jesus seems to imply that these kinds of scenarios happen. You can try to get rid of one issue in your life only to have 7 new evils show up because you're not walking with Jesus. You're just trying to push the problem out.
Yeah, you're removing the problem, but you're not finding the true solution that would cure you of that problem, which is the surrendering.
So you had mentioned earlier, that I think, when we think of demon possession, we think of a demon kind of being poured into a vessel, and he needs a vessel. And you were saying like that's not really it. And then Greg brought up the example of Judas, but also it seems to me like this guy is a vessel that is filled with demons, number one. But number two, one of the things I found interesting as we kind of read this passage was the possessed man with many demons, legions. When Jesus cast out the demons, he sent them into a herd of pigs. But he did so because, number one, they begged Jesus, number one, not to send them out of the country. Uh-huh. What does that mean? I mean, and then they begged to be sent into the pigs. And so part of that is, what does it mean to be sent out of the country? I don't want that. So do they need a living host, or can they just wander around or whatever? And the reason I ask that is because they were asking to be thrown into the pigs, so I need a living host. Don't just, throw me out into the atmosphere in some other country. And then the significance of them being in the pigs, was it the convenience that the pigs are right there? Or was it the fact that the pigs are unclean, unclean animals, and so they unclean spirits? Hey,
I mean, I can answer
we're a good match. I'll swipe right to that.
Yeah. Oh gosh. The pig one's easy. Yes, they're convenient, and yes, they were unclean animals. So it would
be both to me.
It's just both. Like legitimately, they would have enjoyed going to the unclean.
And so I know that I joked swipe right, but I don't even know if that's the right way to swipe.
And it's just there's a couple theories about what is an unclean spirit, and so that's a whole other can of worms we can open up on another day. But the idea is they do want to occupy people. But when it comes to demonize, I just want people to understand that you get this idea that even people in certain religious circles think of themselves as a container, and yes, in the one sense, if you surrender enough to a spirit, it will occupy in the sense of it'll start controlling your actions because you have surrendered to it. But I just want people to think holistically. Think of it in terms of influence, not that you're some kind of meat puppet, right? That you have a willful response to those things. And so whatever you surrender to in your life, it has ownership of you. And there's only really two things that a human being can be owned by as a part of authority. It's either God or it's some other influence, which is the lie that is stemmed and connected to the devil. So unfortunately or fortunately, if you're a child of God, you're owned by him. He's going to be present with you. Nothing can occupy you unless you give it a lot of influence. So in that case, it has a certain amount of sway over you that you've given it. Now that's going to come into conflict with where God lives, because I feel like God lives in you. So you're going to have to choose at some point whether you really believe the God that's with you or not. But if you're not a Christian, all bets are off. If you believe, but the thing about the devil is he doesn't want you to just like manifest with horns and all this weird stuff. He just doesn't want you to believe in God. So if you live in a post-religious era where you think it's all a line of reasoning, why would he start doing supernatural things in your presence? Because it's not going to influence you. You already believe a lie. You're already kind of owned by those worldviews and that thought, and that's going to lead to ultimate destruction without having to do much of anything. And so my worry is that what influences you is the bigger question. It could be direct demonic access. Maybe you like power that comes from the supernatural. That's going to be a problem. Well, how is that any different than I just like to party and drink and do whatever I feel is necessary and I don't care about anything else? Both lead to the same path is what I'm saying. So to me, both of them are just as dangerous. And so when you talk to someone who believes in all the supernatural stuff, they're going to see all kinds of things, in my opinion. But you talk to a rationalist or someone who thinks everything can be explained, it's a different lie, it's a different temptation with the same kind of end, and it still feels powerless. And I think instinctually people know there is something more, there's got to be something more, or they're trying to inspire to something more. And I think that's the way we're created. And so it's what you surrender to in that thought that determines the course of your life. So
when it comes to the why did they beg not to be sent out of the country, there's a lot of debate about why that is and what's going on there. But and what I'm going to say has a little bit of controversy behind it, because
the territorial spirits.
Yeah, the concept of the territorial spirit is a little bit taken and blown out of proportion in certain areas, certain particular kind of places in the modern world. Yeah. 1 second. And there we go.
All right.
What I really want us to understand is that doesn't mean that there isn't some kind of they don't
influence.
Consider themselves like in charge of an area. For example, we see that when Daniel, in the book of Daniel, I think it's chapter 9, is praying, and
the king of Tyre,
there's a delay between when his prayer comes and the answer comes. And when the angel Michael shows up finally, he says, or Gabriel shows up actually. He says, Michael had to fight on my behalf because the Prince of Persia was holding me back. And the Prince of Persia is considered the spiritual power that was fighting against Michael and keeping Gabriel from getting there. Now, why is he the Prince of Persia? Well, why does Rome seem to have the name of a god, Roma? You've got these concepts that are Athena was the goddess of Athens. So you get these concepts of like the gods liked their territories, they liked their places that they ruled and they owned, they considered theirs. They were named after them. These kinds of thoughts. So if you have those in the background of your mind, and you know that the Baals lived in a certain territory and they were up on a certain mountain, if you knew that that's where their court was held.
Lived on the mountain, going to the bathroom.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But if you also knew that he was over, on Olympus somewhere is supposed to be these gods, and our God lives on Mount Zion, but God was constantly saying, I'm not a territorial God. Why does he have to say I'm not a territorial God? Why does he have to show up in Babylon in a rolling chariot to Ezekiel to basically say, like, just because you're here doesn't mean I'm not with you? And the big difference between our God and the other gods is, yes, they don't have the ability to manifest beyond their territories. They're not omnipresent. They are
whether I'm in the heights of heavens or the depths of Sheol, you are there.
Right. God's everywhere. No demonic being, no angelic being is everywhere. They are in
they're
in a specific locality.
They're not omnipresent.
And so when you have that understanding, it's very likely they've organized themselves around territorial areas. And so these demons are like, I don't want to go anywhere else. I kind of like it here. I like our gig we got. We don't want to go anywhere else. Don't send us out of the country. It's a weird request. But Jesus acknowledges it to them and then let out of almost like a mercy to them. He's like, I'm going to punish you eventually. Get out of here. That's weird. But this has been taken pretty far to see Peter Wagner's concepts where he starts to argue, you need to go out there and pray over the demons, over the areas that you live in and stuff like that. And I'm like, now, I don't know about that, but I do think wherever, this would be the New Testament concept. Wherever there's a manifestation of power, aka called a government, there are likely demonic presences. Wherever influence can be wrought on humanity, there are demonic influences playing the game. Why is Hollywood weird? Because there are demonic influences playing in the game over there. Why is the government got corruption like crazy? That's why it doesn't matter who goes in. No, the demonic is playing the game. We got to be praying. God says pray for these places of influence.
Yeah, so this is the thing. Like a lot of people, this is a concern of mine. Take it for what you will, but a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to pray against the spirit. The truth, though, is the battle is in the hearts and minds of the people who believe that thing. So confronting the lie with the truth, like if you want to fight Hollywood, make a movie that glorifies God. If you want to minister to Hollywood and because you see it's under a demonic influence, discuss your ideas, share them. It's the lie that needs to be confronted with the truth that saves people, and pray. You can pray for the spiritual encounter, but I find that what's more helpful or more useful is substituting the lies with the truth. That's where the battles begin. And so if you start going after these spirits and stuff, you can get wrapped up in the spiritual aspect and forget the people that are being captured by this situation. So just be cognizant if that's where you're leading, to make your love more applicable to the people you're ministering to sometimes. Because it gets real abstract. It's like, I'm praying against the demonic spirit of such and such. And you're like, okay, well, I pray God that our church does this to combat that lie, that they believe that this is the way to live, that we do everything that that's a much more, I think, effective way to communicate what's going on.
Now again, when people like pray over their household, they're moving into a house that was drug infested, before they moved in or whatever, and so they want to pray the evil spirits out. And so they walk around the house and they pray to the spirits to leave, right? Part of me always was like, that kind of seems weird that you would pray, and talk to these spirits to leave rather than just simply just addressing God, going, hey, clean house for me, and I don't have to deal with you guys. I'm just going to ask the one who is going to cast you out of here and I take the shortcut.
Right. I think that there's no necessary, actually, in my conversations with Talbot professors who've had to do exorcisms, you don't deal directly with the demonic. Yeah. You deal with the truths, and you say, by the power that Christ has given me, by the power Christ has over you, you need to listen to him. He's telling you leave. And what Jude says, like, you don't rebuke them. You say the Lord rebukes you.
Yeah.
It's not about your power. It's not about your ability. It's not about what's in you. It's about God's already said these things. God's already done these things. So yes, in that sense, it's true. Now, whether or not you should go around, cleansing out your house and things like that, there's going to be people who debate. There's not a lot of evidence scripturally to support any of that kind of stuff. I'd have to look around a little bit. There is a sense of like, hey, you had to cleanse the temple. They had to do that kind of work. So there's a sense of spiritual uncleanliness that goes on. But we're the temple of God now. And I think that if there are demons that localize in places, as it seems to be, that there may be a need to proclaim the kingdom of God has come upon this house, and you have no rights or anything here because Jesus claims this home. So Jesus, remove all those that would be, and you ask him to cleanse it out. And look, I've had some issues in a house with some weird stuff and things. And yeah, when we would go through the process.
Teenagers.
Yeah, no, like legitimately like weird stuff. Like ask your daughter when she was babysitting my daughter, she saw some weird stuff in that room. And that room was a bizarre room. I mean, she claims the rocking chair was rocking without anything in it. And it was just like weird stuff. And that one alcove was strange, and there were drug people who were using it beforehand. I don't think that can't manifest stuff in an area. Now, what you do need to be careful about is that they're lying to you. They're liars. They're messing with you. So we went around, just ask Christ to, cleanse the house, make it yours. And we really didn't have any issues.
It kind of reminded me too of like, when Michael, walked up and he was like, I don't remember exactly the wordage, but he was basically, I wasn't going to be, Michael wasn't going to be arrogant or anything. And he just said, simply, the Lord rebuke you.
Right,
so it was like, I'm not going to, push this power, and all this. I'm just simply going to say, Lord rebuke you, and that's all I have to say,
Yeah, I just think that power isn't like, it's not a weapon that I wield. It's God, and so I'm asking God to bless something or to help in a situation. So it's like, it's not like if my dad's here and he's going to fight a battle for me, that I have the power of my dad by pointing and saying, stop this, please. You know what I mean? It's really
the power of my father.
Yeah, it doesn't come upon me. His power doesn't come upon me in that way.
This isn't an Eastern,
it's just
Japanese anime.
It is who he is. So I have no problem with people dedicating their house to the Lord that was dedicated to something else. I've done similar things, but it's an act of submission to, Lord, this place was used for evil. I want it to be used for good. And so I want your influence to reign in my house. And I pray over this room, and I pray that everything that needs to go on in this room honors you as well. And you can pray through your house, but it's more like vision casting and calling upon the Lord. I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem when you think it's somehow the ritual itself has the power. And that's where I'm like, okay, now you're just doing this as a thing. And so,
and then they've got you. I mean, this is where the seven sons of Sceva come in.
Yeah.
Like, go back and read that in the book of Acts. It's in Ephesus. These guys are Jewish shamans. They're really good at this. They come in, and these guys beat them up. These seven sons of Sceva, these Jewish exorcists come in, and this one guy who's possessed goes, Paul I've heard of, and Jesus I've heard of, but I don't know who you guys are. And just beats him up, strips him, and sends him out naked running through the streets. And it's because they were dependent upon rituals, not upon the one who was known, right? Jesus is the one who does the work. The Spirit is the one who does the work. The Father is the one who does the work, and that's the critical piece.
It's the most important piece. Is the whole text is saying like God is the one who saves. God is the one who's in authority and control of everything, and so it is a matter of submission. Ultimately, we all need to submit to the will of God, or something else has influence over our life.
To surrender. And
either it's fear, it's something else in life.
That's why you don't get caught up in like, oh look, he's getting his name, he's doing all this stuff. No, this thing said, I adjure you.
Yeah. He's imploring the authority of God to do something. So the thing about the text that's really weird is that in the ancient world, when a Jewish exorcist would do something, they would call on a name more powerful than themselves. They often had like things that they would read or do. Jesus isn't doing any of that. He's a really odd exorcist. He does it in his own name, and that is completely unheard of. And it's actually, you would be like, whoa, that's almost like you wouldn't do that. It'd be something like, that would dishonor God. You're supposed to call on the power that's greater than you. And same thing in the Greek world, you called on the spirits because they were greater than you to invoke. Jesus is talking about himself, and now the spirits are saying, I'm invoking you, Jesus, let us do this thing.
Well, what's trippy is you get this like section, and crying out with a loud voice, he said, what have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? How did this demon find out his name? Like, this guy says his name, and he shouldn't know who the guy is. Like, I didn't go into that, but the disciples have been like, what is going on? And the fact that the demon would know his name would imply in the demonology world of that time, the demon had the one up. That he has power now because he knows the name. And so he goes, I adjure you. He's almost trying to tell Jesus what to do. I adjure you by God, don't torment me. He's like, ha, 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 I got you. And Jesus goes, come out, because he was saying, come out of the man, you unclean spirit. And he just asked him, what's your name? He doesn't go, I adjure you by God to tell me your name. He just goes, what's your name? He goes, my name is Legion. Like, I just laugh because like one of the other demons like, dang it, Blabbermouth just spoke up.
Yeah.
Why'd we bring that guy? He's always here. He's always blabbing.
Snitches get stitches.
Yeah, we're gonna punch you. You know, it's like, for we are many. And he begged him. That's when he starts begging him. They suddenly are confronted with
By the
just
authority,
simple
power.
authority and power of Jesus. And he just goes, what's your name? You don't need to go through all this adjuration and stuff. He's like, I am God. What's your name? Legion. We're many. No, please don't send us out of the pigs. Please, please, please send us to the pigs. You know, it's like, suddenly they're begging like crazy. Before they're all, we got you. It's like, it's really weird.
Yeah, the last bit that was amazing to me in the passage from the sermon is that the people in the town that's in this territory, that's living this lifestyle counterintuitive to God, they beg God after hearing that the demon guy was set free and he's talking to them. They beg Jesus to leave. And this opens up a conversation I think is important, is we have the assumption that just because people know who Jesus is and how powerful he is, that they would want him around. And I think that this is very much like our culture. It's like you saw this thing, but you still want control over what you do with your life. And you don't want an authority figure telling you that what you're into is wrong. And so it's asking Jesus, please, we beg you to leave so I can do what I want. Basically, he's leaving them in their situation, their hellish situation that they asked for. And this is the thing I think that happens to a lot of people. There are people that like the bad things that they're doing more than they want to surrender. They like being the God of their own life, the things that they do more important than they want to surrender to people to a God who would actually help them, would cast out anything going on in their life that wants to bring freedom to them. They're rejecting that freedom. And a lot of people will do that. And that's what I feel is like, if you have this antithetical approach to Christianity, you have this hatred that builds up in your heart, and you haven't articulated where that comes from and why, I think it's a good question to ask yourself, who's in control of the thoughts of your life? You think it's you, but what are those thoughts? And are they really good thoughts to have? Would they lead to safety and freedom, or would they lead to bondage? And I think that the saddest part of the story is that he's like, okay, if that's what you want, I'm going to choose to let you be in the condition that you want to be in. And that's a hellish state. Yeah. But people choose that. And I think that's important to know.
Hence the name of the series, Magnetic.
Yeah.
Where you're either drawn or you're repulsed by the presence.
Push yourself away, right. And I hope that this has been more drawing to all of you out there to press into Jesus, not out of fear, not out of a Halloween scary thing, but out of the fact that in him is a God who is dangerous to the evils of this world. And he's called us into those dangerous places because he is the dangerous one. I love that idea that you walk with the danger. You walk with the one that's scary to everything else. And so just that it would give us the continued courage to go out, do good works, share Christ, love people, live for Christ, do all of that.
Take him with you on the boat.
Yeah, take him with you. Use your skills, take them with you to work, go on out in the middle of if he tells you to go to work in the middle of the night, you go and you figure it out, right? So, but hey, we hope that you've enjoyed this particular podcast. We know this provoked questions. We know that this has got a lot of interesting stuff in it, and we want you to keep chasing the rabbit. Don't feel like you're taking us in a different direction. Nope, we're willing to go where you want to go. So let us know. If you've got a question, you've got a comment, you've got a curiosity, please send us your thoughts at rabbittrail@obcc.church. That's rabbittrail@obcc.church, and we would love to bring it up in our next podcast without Brent.
Yes.
But we hope that you do have a good rest of your week. And for this week, Brent says,
Boom chakalaka.
Bye.